Alright, guys, so today I'm going to be going over and reviewing teams and ranking them that made the playoffs last year. The tier is pretty explanatory. Obviously, fall off. I don't think they're likely to make it. Wild card bubble. I just think that, they might not make it, but if they do, they're probably one and done. And wild card contenders are teams that I think most likely will at least make the wild card and that they could win a game. So let's jump into it. Now, I think the Browns are destined for a pretty good run this year. I think that Deshaun Watson, I think he very well could actually break through this year. Obviously, the team isn't looking much different. They added Judy as another weapon who he could be all right as a wide receiver three, and I think that might be a fine role for him. But I just think that they're going to be all right. And, Judy could compete for the two spot as well. I don't quite see it, but I think that they could have a good run in the playoffs. And I think that they do have a solid chance to place maybe third in that division. Obviously, in the AFC North, most of the time what happens and the reason that one of the teams ends up missing is just because of unfortunate injuries. But this year, I think it could be a little different. But moving on next to the Steelers. The Steelers actually, I know that they might be a little bit better. I know Russell Wilson might be able to do better in the season than Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph could last year. He'll be better in the playoffs, but I just think that this team is still pretty mediocre. Even with that, I still think that Mike Tomlin's a good enough coach to coach him out of that. I think that they could be a bubble team. I just don't really know if they're going to be contending, at least like winning a game in the playoffs. I could, even though they're getting hyped up, I could still see them being kind of a one and done team. Now, the Dolphins up next. Obviously, they lost Robert Hunt, who was one of their key offensive linemen. But I still think this is a fine team. And I think that they're still going to contend this year. And they do have a pretty solid chance to win the AFC East. It's pretty open. The team isn't much worse than last year. If anything, they'll be a little better. They'll hopefully have Jalen Phillips back come the playoffs. And even if he misses a couple weeks, this is still a good team that should at least be able to play well without him. But I think that they can have a pretty good run in the playoffs. Obviously, like I said, the AFC East is a little more open. But moving on to the Eagles, I actually think that they could contend pretty heavy this year. Obviously, they drafted Cooper DeJean and the other corner. For some reason, I forget his name. The receiver room is still looking good. And I think that this could be a pretty good year for them. Obviously, last year, the offensive coordinator got fired and he was kind of singled out. But I still think that this will be a pretty solid team. And the corner that they did draft was Quinyon Mitchell. I forgot his name. But moving on to the Bills, I really do like what the Bills are doing. I think that they are building a pretty solid team here. And the reason I say that is we've seen teams in the past that just try to keep contending even when it hasn't worked for like 3 years in a row. But they're just good enough to stay in the playoffs, but they're not, bad enough to miss it and have to try to start a rebuild or anything, kind of like what the Saints have done. But I just think that they can contend if they make the wild card. I think they'll be a solid 9-10 win team. But it wouldn't even surprise me if they did go on to have 11 or 12 wins. I don't think it's very likely though. But I still think that if they do make the playoffs, they can win around. Now the Cowboys, obviously the running back room's not great. The receiver room really isn't great. And if they're missing CeeDee Lamb for half the season, that could mess them up too. But I think that they're kind of going to be like the Steelers this year. I don't know if they're going to have a drastic fall off, but I still just think they won't be too great. And next up is the Ravens. I think that they could, right? It feels like they usually get hit with the injury bug, but I don't want to try to predict anything like that just because of how unpredictable it is. But I think they're going to be good again this year. I don't quite see them as a serious contender in the AFC, but they still could be. And honestly, thinking about how the other contenders from last year in the AFC finished out, I will still put them there. They're still going to be good this year. Lamar, hopefully no injuries, so the Ravens can stay healthy. And that I think that's really what comes down to is if Lamar stays healthy. Obviously, he did last year, but we've seen in years prior that the Ravens haven't had good seasons because of him getting injured, which isn't his fault, but just saying that if he goes down, I think the Ravens go down. But if he doesn't, I still could see them contending. And I like what they did with the running backs too. How they kind of got rid of, well, they didn't get rid of him, but they didn't re-sign Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins, which I think is good for them because obviously they're relying on their run game. So their running back room, instead of having two kind of mediocre guys, which I think J.K. Dobbins could break out, but I still think it's good, to not try to rely on Gus Edwards and that they did add Derrick Henry. And I think that should help them a bit. Now moving on to the Lions, I was already holding them. Um, I think that they also are contenders. Obviously, I just sat them there, but I think that they could contend heavy too to make the Super Bowl. At least they'll make the NFC Championship. And they're still a good team. It's not like they went crazy in the offseason, but they still are going to be good. Dan Campbell is obviously a great coach. And what you notice with a lot of these teams is that coaching does really matter. Like the top teams have mostly good coaches, even though a lot of people argue that Nick Sirianni isn't too good for the Eagles. But this is still a good receiver room. Obviously, they lost Josh Reynolds, but he was only their receiver 3 or 4. Hopefully, Sam Laporta takes another step to being good, and this offense will still be good this year. Aiden Hutchinson on the defense should lead the way. So I still think this is going to be a good team and all, and I think that they should contend. I want to put the Packers in contending as well, but just because I have two other NFC teams, I think that they're destined for a good run. I think they could come up short just because I think Jordan Love might not have the experience yet, or if they face the Niners again, because it seems like the Packers don't have the best luck against the Niners. But I still think they're destined for a good run. The Texans next, I think that they'll definitely step it up, and do seriously think they could contend. Obviously, they added Joe Mixon, and I think that should help them quite a bit, just in the run game at least. Obviously, their running back last year was still kind of solid. I think Stroud should take another step. And the big name Stephon Diggs they added, which I could see him falling off just a little bit this year because of age, and even last year he wasn't too elite. The defense still looks fine for them, and I think that they should be a pretty solid team. I think the Buccaneers will still be good this year. Oh my goodness, it's lagging. I think the Buccaneers, though, should still be good this year, but I don't think that they're really going to go too crazy or anything. I think that they'll be all right, but I just think that they're definitely on the bubble of wildcard teams that could make it. And I think that Baker should still be fine. But I just think that last year, they won the first game just because the Eagles were such a mess, in my opinion. And they did actually come kind of close to beating the Lions. But I think they'll be a bubble team. Obviously, maybe the Falcons should contend for the NFC South a little better this year. But I don't really have much to add to them. I think the Chiefs are destined for another good run. I don't see them three-peating. But obviously, they did add quite a few solid pieces this year, such as bringing in Marquise Brown or Hollywood Brown. Obviously, Rashee Rice will miss the first half of the season, but I just think that the Ravens or the Chiefs will be topped by either the Ravens or the Texans in the playoffs. I still think they could make the AFC Championship, or even they'll definitely be a divisional round team, but I do see them coming up short this year. Next up, I think the Rams do have a bit of a fall off this year. Obviously, they lost Aaron Donald, but they still did a good job drafting. I really think you could put them in the bubble tier, but I do want to at least have one team taking the spot for the fall off tier. And I think that that definitely could be the Rams. And I think that this is the year Stafford will finally decline. A lot of people have been calling for it. I haven't. But this year, I really do believe that Stafford is going to drop down just a little bit and he won't quite be as good. Obviously, Puka Nacua was a little crazy last year, and it wasn't expected. As long as he continues his success, they should be fine. But I think even Cooper Kupp could take a small step back, even though I wouldn't bet on it or anything. Obviously, he is 31 now, and he has dealt with some injuries in the past couple years. Even last year he did. But I still think that the Rams should be a fine team, but I don't think they'll really be in the bubbles tier or anything. And I think the Niners are destined for another good run. I just I believe that they're still a good team. I don't put them in the contender tier though, just because that Ayuk is most likely to be traded, it sounds like. Even though the same thing was being said about Nietzsche's, like the exact line that it's more likely he's traded than re-signs with the Hurricanes during the offseason. Obviously, that's NHL. And I saw a title that said the exact same thing about Ayuk. I think it's a little more true with Brandon Ayuk, but I still think that the Niners will have a good run. Kyle Shanahan's a great coach. And if I had to move one of these good run teams down, it'd probably have to be the Browns, just to wildcard contenders. And just because of the uncertainty with Deshaun Watson, even though I think he'll be a little bit better this year. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I felt a little tired, almost like I was stumbling over my words. So if I didn't make much sense, that's my fault. I probably should have wrote some notes down for this, so I was trying to go off the top of my head. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and forgive me for that, and come back for another video.